polling stations to cast our ballots today. Not long ago, after a week of political uncertainty, Theo Novak's government came tumbling down in the House of Commons, and in response, a general election was called. Now, after a week-long campaign, the results are finally coming in. To start this evening, we're about to go to YouGov's exit poll. Before then, though, quickly, let me explain how tonight will work. Myself, Tormentium, and Sid Mountbatten are here on the main stage. We'll be discussing the results, the state of politics, and anything else relevant as the details come in. The show should go for about an hour. Over on stage 2, Tormentium will also be questioning party leaders, cabinet, and guests over the course of the night with respect to how the results are coming in. On the ticker below me, you'll see the calls for each constituency as they come in, with some relevant ones being mentioned by me as well. We'll keep you up to speed with headlines too. Every 10 constituencies will also throw up a map so you can see how Britain is being painted. And now, we're ready to reveal the YouGov exit poll results. We are now prepared to say and report on the fact that YouGov predicts that it will be a hung parliament. The Imperial Party, they say, will come first, but not cross the threshold. Now, we'll move to the full results. As you can see, the Liberal Democrats are suggested to make considerable gains, whereas New Labour falls far behind. Now let's go to the panel for discussion. I'm going to go first. Torm, are you there?
Yes, hello.
So this is different than what the campaign was telling us. Do you trust the exit poll this time? I'm sure you remember that it was spot on last time, but this is radically different than what the campaign said.
It is quite spot on last time. I'm not quite sure about that Liberal Democrat result. 19 seats would be huge. It'd be over double what they received last election. So I think that'd be a huge result for Crank. I'm sure he'd be very happy, but I'm tempering my expectations until we see the first couple results come in.
That's fair. I think I'm looking at the turnout at this, and the turnout is a bit lower than it was last election last exit poll. I'm gonna go to Sid now. Do you trust the exit poll? If you do, what are your comments on
it? I think the exit poll is a bit, well, not suspicious isn't quite the right word, but I don't think it's going to be as accurate as last election, purely because that is a completely different political landscape to what it was, and I don't see how Liberal Democrats and New Labour can make such drastic changes, but obviously time will tell.
So definitely, I think it's interesting though to look at that exit poll and really think if that is true, that is a massive political upset that really no one was predicting. But yeah, so while we're waiting for the first seats to come in, and we'll get it really momentarily, I want to make a quick point about how results will be coming in. So as I'm sure everyone noticed, we just redistricted because of the Irish Free State becoming independent. So as of now, all parties hold less seats than they won last time because 9 or 8 seats were removed yesterday. So some gains won't mean that they're getting another seat. It'll just mean that they're getting a new constituency. I'll tell you when it's an important gain and a gain you can really use. But other than that, you should be good. Everything that you'll see on the screen should be correct. So again, we're waiting for the first result to come in. I want to go to Torm real quick, and I want to just ask him, politics is fickle right now. We saw New Labour rise to win a record number of votes last election to utter destruction now. This would put them at a very low amount of raw votes, but just in general, going from a record number of seats to third place, or record number of votes to third place, is kind of rough. What do you think this tells about what New Labour was, Torm?
I think it just goes to show you how strong Theo was as a campaigner, right? Like, no offense to Soupchild, the now incumbent leader to New Labour, but he couldn't get elected as an independent in April. He could not get 5% of the vote as his own person. So I think it really just goes to show you how bad New Labour campaigning is now without Theo. And I mean, their Discord lost a third of its membership, if not more. I mean, that's just unseen.
And especially the fact that we're not going to have any New Labour guests on tonight because they didn't have anyone to send. Soup isn't even online right now, which of course you can't punish anyone for being personally busy, but it just goes to show that they couldn't muster a cabinet. And
He threw in the towel, no less.
Yeah. And the problem then is that everyone really competent from New Labour, bar a few, went to the Imperial Party. And I want to go to Sid to ask that now the Imperial Party is stuffed to the brim with really competent, really popular, and really ambitious people. How do you think that's going to affect the Imperial Party, especially now that if they don't have a majority? How do you think all these new people in the Imperial Party will affect the internal balance of it going into government?
Yeah, they definitely have a mentality of government or bust at this point. Like, this is their third election now. They definitely have got a team ready to govern, but it's up to them to make sure their campaign has been up to standard, which I think previously we haven't seen that good of a campaign from Imperials, but I think due to like the lack of true opposition, like the only Liberal Democrats were the only one who really could stand up to it, and obviously it's been discussed that New Labour pretty much a completely different party to what they were last term. And I think that the people who have come from New Labour, I think, well, obviously the first one was Sangris, who came from like during the previous government, and now I think James Acheson, how do you say his name? I think he defected.
So.
Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, obviously, I think they've got so many previous New Labour cabinet ministers now. I think it only makes sense that they're going to be so much stronger coming into this election.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting to see how they all went to the Imperial Party. You didn't see any defection. I think Charles Cunningham went to the Liberal Democrats, but pretty much everyone from the New Labour cabinet either are now backbench Imperial supporters or just Imperial campaign staff. And that's another thing I want to go to Torm with, that the Liberal Democrat cabinet hasn't changed. Everyone from the top two parties last time are now in one party. How do you think this is going to affect politics going forward? You know, where's the balance of competency going to be going forward?
I think the Liberal Democrats has their own pool of talent, which they deemed more useful than what New Labour had. Meanwhile, the Imperial cabinet last term, I think we can all agree, was subpar, with a number of either inactive shadow cabinet members or just completely inactive ones. So I think it just goes to show their different priorities in looking for talent. I know we saw a big crossing over the aisles for Sangis, and now Nathis is joining the Imperials, two formerly quite important New Labour cabinet members. So I think it'll be interesting to see how these results come out and how the talent pool does change for both parties.
Yes, I agree. And we just had our first call a second ago. East Riding is a new seat, and it's an Imperial gain. That is a gain. That's not just filling in the void. So the Imperials, we can definitely say the exit polls right on that. The Imperials are going to have more seats than they did last time, but of course, that's obvious. We are not sure yet if the exit poll is correct. It'll take about 10 seats. Once we give you the first constituency map, then we'll be comfortable calling how far the seats have been, or how close the exit poll is to accuracy. Another point I think is interesting that we should bring up is Nolex, which we'll talk about it again with Nottingham, but I want to bring it into the fact of Nolex came out of nowhere and then went back into nowhere. I think that's a really bad indictment of our political system, that someone so populist and really speaking to what people wanted to hear didn't use their mandate. We didn't get the Nolex party or any version of that. Um, I I wonder how that's going to affect the way politics is done in the future. Because even let's bring into another point, we have a lot of votes in play right now. Turnout was another record. I think we're ready to say it was higher than NUSA's, which is a huge, huge thing. We rarely accomplish that. If that many people were able to just, cling to a candidate and then also that candidate leaves, we're kind of in this moment where parties aren't stable, which is a but voters aren't stable. If all those people left New Labor, all these people are joining the Imperials, all these people are joining the Liberal Democrats, that's a fundamental break from how it was before. I want to ask you, Dom, do you think this new way of system, a new way of votes moving around, being so fickle, is going to stick around? Or do you think this is another symptom of just, coronavirus quarantine?
Yeah, this definitely isn't sustainable. I don't think. I do not see how once autumn comes and like the summer holidays are over and like normal life resumes after the virus, I don't see how we're going to sustain these figures. Like, because Noosa normally get like what 1K, and they've only got 500 in the last election, which is pretty mad already. I think as lockdown slowly comes to an end, we're going to lose activity. And I think it's up to the parties in the Commons now. Whoever gets elected, they have to do their best to make sure that this is sustainable in the long run, because that's going to be the real challenge, I think.
I totally agree that it's going to be up to the parties, and the problem is that I don't know if Karenka is going to stay on. We could see if it becomes an imperial government, or if there's a coalition and it's not an imperial coalition, or it is an imperial coalition. We have all those factors still in play. But if the Liberal Democrats lose Karenka, or the Imperials lose Fenton, those are two parties who might lose their leaders who are extremely good at campaigning. And then we kind of have this, I would say, a third election, which would just be a total retraction and just shrinkage on all the progress we've made. What do you think, Torm? What do you think needs to be done this parliament to maybe not prevent that, but ensure that when the time comes that this happens, parliament is a little less destroyed?
Well, this comes down to like cultivating talent, right? Like getting the new people in positions and letting them kind of like learn under more competent, like and more patient prime ministers. And I think Fenton Karenka will be good at doing that. I'm very glad actually that both their cabinets don't have a ton of old faces in it, especially the Liberal Democrats. If you look at their cabinet, there's a lot of people who've never actually served in cabinet before. Imperials have quite few old faces, but still they haven't been nearly as experienced as I would say we saw in New Labour under Theo, with a couple of very old faces, and even before that under Josh Radcliffe, especially going at the start of the year, you saw a lot of old faces. So I think this is a really good trend going forward, and we'll have a lot of new talent.
Okay, fair, yeah. We're going to be going to a tour, and we'll be going over to stage 2 in a minute and talking to some Imperial and Liberal Democrat representatives. But before we go over there, I want to ask Dom, just again, to get his reflection now. Turnout is, we can confirm it at 532, which is ahead of Noosa. I think in terms of, can you just explain to people who might be new the significance and magnitude of that we're ahead of Noosa during a summer election?
Yeah, previously, I think this time last year, I think the turnout was like 250. So in a year, that's doubled, and I think that's really indicative of like what has gone on behind the scenes in just the UK as a whole and how far we've come as a country. I think even without the lockdown, we'd still be getting numbers like, I'd say probably 150 less than if it wasn't lockdown. But I think that still shows real progress on how far we've come. But yeah, obviously, as I said before, it's up to us to try and sustain this now. And that's up to the parties to make sure this becomes a consistent thing.
And I think that it'll fall on the government, but especially the opposition, to not die this term. Whoever is in opposition, whether it's a liberal led or an imperial led, it needs to be consistent and it needs to work entirely well. But yeah, so I think we're now ready to move over to Torm. If we're ready over in stage 2, are you ready there, Torm? To question Fent and Atro?
Yep.
Perfect. We'll move over now.
So, I have with me here, leader of the Imperial Party, Phantom Jerker, and the representative from the Liberal Democrats, Atrophier. I feel like starting with Phantom here is a very good idea considering the results we saw. We saw in the exit poll with Imperial sitting at 22 seats. So, Phantom, what do you think about that, firstly?
I think it's well, I don't like sort of thinking too much about further predictions into the future and whatever. I think it's the overall exit poll. In my personal opinion, if I was forced to make an opinion, I think it's a little bit wrong, and I think it's a little bit sort of undermining the party. In terms of the general trend it's following, Imperials first, then Liberal Democrats, and then New Labour. I think no question about it. That's pretty much how it'll be.
So that raises the question: if the Imperials don't get a majority, and this exit poll is wrong, how are you going to go forward?
If the Imperials weren't to get a majority, we would strive towards a minority government. I do genuinely believe that at this moment in time, an Imperial government is what the United Kingdom needs. And it's why I've led my party into a general election. It's why we've put out manifestos and campaigned, because that is what the country needs at the moment. We are in quite a fragile state. And we all saw what happened with New Labour last term. We really, really do not want a repeat of that. And the Imperials have got everything under the board. They've got a good cabinet. They've hopefully got good leadership from myself. We've got quite an extensive and decisive plan as well. We know what we're doing. As soon as sort of if we get into government, we're going to hit it running. We know exactly what we're doing week in, week out. And we're organised and really, really ready to take on the challenge. And that's what we need. We need stable and an organised government.
I think that's a very respectable point to make, but as you said, minority government last term absolutely collapsed. So would you be willing to make like a coalition with either party if you don't get over the line?
We'll always seek for cross-party consensus because that's how our system should work. If we can agree to things collectively as a parliament, then we should push that.
All right. And that goes to Atrophier. We see huge Liberal Democratic gains, at least with this exit poll, going up to 19 seats, which is double what they had previously. How is everyone feeling in the party right now?
I think a lot of people are feeling really happy that our seat share has gone up totally, but I also think that generally, overall, some people might be disappointed that we're not in government this time around. But I also think that there is levels of energy within the party if this happens to be the result.
Well, was there an expectation of government from the Liberal Democrats? As we saw Soupchild throw in the towel quite early, saying New Labour shouldn't be even aiming for government, that they should just be trying to recollect themselves. And I mean, as a third party last term, was it ever on the mind of, say, Karenka or other senior party leadership that you wanted to become government?
It was definitely in our minds that we wanted to be in government, and with this result, it could possibly turn out like that. But the results are quite close, so if it does end up anywhere close to what it was before, to what this exit poll predicts, it would be massive relief to our party. And for next term, if exit poll turns out correct, we could aim for government.
That's true. And how do you feel like, I think an important question for this too is how strong was the Liberal Democrat campaign? I mean, I'd say the Imperials, and especially Phantom Jerker, could comment on this, but they had a very good base of campaigning. They had a lot of support last term, and they just built upon it this time. What do you think the Liberal Democrats have improved or possibly failed on in campaigning this term?
I think we have seen a lot of Liberal Democrat candidates become more active as more of them have been recruited. I also think that generally within the Liberal Democrat campaign, there was lack of like logging campaigners, for example. So, just knowing who we could speak to, etc. But I do think campaigning has definitely improved for the Liberal Democrats this time round. But in terms of what we could have improved on, I think logging, as I just said, is a point that we could improve on. I'm sure, but we did devise a plan this time to improve from last time, and I think we can do that again at the next election if this exit poll is out to be true.
Right. And Fenton, what do you think about that? Same with the campaigning for this election. How strong do you think the Imperials were, and maybe how weak the Liberal Democrats were in comparison?
What we did as an Imperial Party is we looked at what we did wrong last time and what we did right, and we came up with a plan and a campaigning strategy for this time. We also took into account different varying factors. Obviously, we've just sort of had a general election. A lot of people might be feeling quite apathetic, which actually the polls show completely opposite to what our prediction was originally. But I think in terms of campaigning, we've delivered a good campaign. We're being quite clear and quite consistent. We put out arguably a really, really good manifesto once again. In my biased opinion, I'd say probably the best once again. Again, we've had that planned. We've been quite organised. We're on the ball with everything. Everything we do, we have planned and organised. And it was the same last term. It was the same last election, and we've improved on it. And honestly, I think our campaigning, we've done all right this election, and hopefully that's what the polls will show.
Yeah, especially as we're seeing results coming in. We currently have Imperials at 6, Liberal Democrats at 3, and New Labour at 0. And with that, I'll go back to Connor.
Yes, so we're ready to give you an update of the map. We're about 10 seats in now, and we can see that pretty comfortably the Imperial Party have been picking up seats in Wales and in the west of England. The Liberal Democrats have picked up 2 new seats. They held some of their already consistent seats, but they just gained... my bad, let me pull this up. They picked up Redbridge and West Yorkshire. West Yorkshire is a big gain because that was a really safe New Labour seat. So what that tells us is that the Liberal Democrats are performing better than they did in the polls beforehand, might be performing up to the expectation of the exit poll. But New Labour is performing worse than the exit poll because they've lost some pretty safe seats already. We can comfortably say, though, that now the Imperials are also kind of outperforming the exit poll, as we can tell. They're quite a ways ahead of the Liberal Democrats, and while this is still very early, we'll have to see. But we're a little less certain about the exit poll results now, but of course, the way they're giving it to us could be entirely forged, and we'll get the same exit poll result in 20 seats or so. But I want to go to the panel now, and I would like to ask Torm. Now, do you have any comments, especially on the way Fentim was responding? I felt it was a very interesting interpretation of the results they were having. Fentim was very cautious of the results, and he wasn't quick to say that, like, yes, we are definitely going to be in government. He was saying, we really hope we're in. How do you interpret that?
He was definitely playing it safe. I really don't know exactly why that position is what it is, because he doesn't seem very interested in a coalition, especially with New Labour at this point. And one with the Liberal Democrats seems very out of reach, considering the exit poll that puts him at 19. So his confidence probably will come as the night goes on and see how many seats they actually do get. But for this early on, yeah, he was definitely a little bit timid to make any big commitments.
I definitely agree. And I wanted to go to Dom, what are your opinions on the way Atro was responding to some of these questions? Because I felt he was almost... I don't think the Liberal Democrats have this election fully in perspective. I think they both have a very cautious, but also not the most cautious perspective. How do you think this result will affect the Liberal Democrats?
Well, if you look at the results of the last election, they still didn't really get that many seats, and I think they're definitely going to see gains, but I think for a party that's been in government so much over the last few months, I think having a term out in opposition, which I think they're probably accepted is going to happen at this point, I think that could be good for them. They can really establish themselves as not the party that just bumps up any government they want. I think they can really show that we're actually here to be the main party, and that we've got actually got a future in politics.
I think that's a good point. The Liberal Democrats really do need to make themselves a little more distinct than they are, because right now they are just, as you said, they're the third party. If this exit poll is right, they're not the third party anymore. That would be New Labour, which already has been in government, so it can identify itself how it wants. We do have a few interesting calls that have happened recently. The border has just been called, and it's a safe Imperial hold. The Vale of Glamorgan, though, is a big loss for New Labour. That was Soup's seat, and he lost it. It's an Imperial gain. Let's be clear, the Vale of Glamorgan wasn't the safest New Labour seat, but the fact that the leader's seat has been lost is pretty rough. We can also see that Glasgow has just gone to the Liberal Democrats, which is a big gain for them, but a bigger loss for New Labour. I know we're here at election night and election week, and Channel 5, we're starting to doubt the exit poll a little bit because New Labour is underperforming. And we're not really sure how that's going to affect the Liberal Democrats or New Labour, but New Labour is definitely underperforming the exit poll. We do not think they're going to get as high as they were alleged to be. We can confirm also that this is a bit obvious now, but it's very clear the Imperial Party is making substantial gains. They did not lose their safest seat, neither did the Liberal Democrats, which somewhat confirms the exit poll. So we're not ready yet to confirm or deny the exit poll. But I want to take you through a tour real quick of the important seats we have yet to call. So Lancashire is going to be at the very end of the night, but it looks like it might be a pretty contested seat between the Imperial Party and New Labour. And for context, that's the former deputy's seat. So if that falls, and we might also see something like Edinburgh fall. If those seats fall, we're going to see the fact that New Labour has collapsed entirely. It's not entirely sure yet. We don't know. They could just be underperforming now and might overperform later. We're not sure yet. But it's quite obvious that the exit poll is wrong, or at least slightly off. I want to say then that probably will go in the Imperial Party's favor. And then we get to the point where, I know we've asked this question before, but what does Karenka do if the Imperial Party gets a majority? I think, Torm, you would be pretty apt to at least speculate on, truthfully, what does Karenka do if he's in the opposition to a majority government? If the exit poll does turn out wrong, which we're not sure if we're ready to call yet.
That's a good question. Truth be told, I think Karenka is going to be doing a lot of soul searching if the Imperials do get a majority, because especially going off this exit poll, I'm sure the hopes are high that they ran a strong campaign with a good brand, and they really want to see the Liberal Democrats perform in an election where there's not a strong leftist party. I mean, New Labour collapsed. This is the prime opportunity for them, and if they fail to meet expectations, there's going to be a lot of questions to be asked about his leadership and where the party has to go. So I think there's a good chance that you're going to see Karenka either start talking about stepping down, maybe actually step down, or there's going to be big changes in cabinet leadership.
There'd be a bunch of problems there, though, if you do have a Liberal Democrat New Labour coalition. Who would be New Labour's cabinet ministers? I just think that's in and of itself going to be a difficult coalition, but really any deal that isn't going to be a majority government tonight will probably be a difficult coalition. I know Sid was speaking at an election discussion a few nights ago about the fact that New Labour didn't put anyone up as cabinet. They gave us a footnotes manifesto. What are your opinions on what this event, the collapse of New Labour, and how they've performed this campaign, how do you think that reflects on politics? And do you blame Soup, or do you think it's more of a systemic problem with how New Labour was set up?
I think New Labour originally was built around certain individuals, and I don't think there was any future really beyond those people like Theo and Fred originally. And I think whilst I can commend Soup for having a go at it, I just don't see what's the point of being a leader if you're just gonna be there to make up the numbers. Like, if you really, I think to be a leader, you really need to want to make a difference in the Commons, and I haven't seen that at all. And I think whilst the policy list that he released was nice, I just think he could have actually shown a lot more that he truly did want to commit to the position by actually releasing a proper manifesto and like maybe actually putting a shift in to get cabinet ministers.
Yeah, and he said that he had no one, and when we were asking for who can come on election night, he's literally had no one. And that comes to a really awkward moment where it's like, if they really had no one, why are they contesting this election? And I wonder if, had they merged with the Liberal Democrats, if anything of this result would have changed. Obviously, the exit poll tells us it would have been a majority Liberal Democrat government, but I don't know how accurate the exit poll is after we've seen a few more results. And actually, the further along we get, we're definitely confirming that the Imperials will outperform the exit poll. Especially, we just called Suffolk. I said that wrong, whoops. But definitely confirming that the Imperials will outperform the exit poll now, which leaves us in a place where they don't have much room to outperform before they get to a majority, or maybe they'll do something, many prime ministers like Dan Wellesley did, where they're just off a majority, and so they basically form a majority. It's going to be an awkward few minutes, but we have Karenka ready to come on to discuss the results, to discuss the exit poll, everything that's happened so far. I think right now we are at 9 for the Imperials, 4 for the Liberal Democrats, and 3 for New Labour. Torm, whenever you're ready, we'll move over to you with Karenka.
All right. Karenka, welcome to the show at this point. Just to get you updated, the Imperials are beating you 2-1 on each seat. So currently outpacing you at least double. They made major gains, as Connor just pointed out, in a few regions, especially New Labour safe seats. How are you feeling right now? I mean, Liberal Democrats have performed weakly last election. Seats. So where are you feeling right now, and what kind of results are you looking for?
Well, I think firstly the important thing to do is take a step back and not get too carried away about seats and about the practicalities of being able to form a government or not. And quite simply, it looks like we've gained seats. It looks like we've gained votes, which would be a record in terms of votes. Definitely, we'll have to see about seats for the Liberal Democrats, and that obviously is pleasing for me. It'll be interesting to see if we push over 100. I certainly expect us to do that. Certainly, if 130 people have voted for us in an exit poll, I'd expect us to get more than 100 votes in the actual thing. So, without getting too carried away about whether or not we'll be in a good position to form a government or not, because ultimately I don't know, and I can't change that now. The power's out of my hands. I'm very happy, and I'm very proud of the work that has gone on in the party over the last 10 days or so to prepare for this and to campaign for this, and in speaking to citizens and pushing the Lib Dem message out there.
So it does, to me, ask an interesting question of what is the purpose of the Liberal Democrats at this point? Because you say you're not focused on the seats, you're not focused on the ultimate goal of government. So what are you looking for? Are you even considering maybe a possible coalition with New Labour if Imperials just miss the mark? Do you even want to consider yourself in contention for the government? Or is this more of a ideological campaign where you want to spread a message and not really want to see yourself in power?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, not focused in the sense of it's not obviously something that we have on our minds, more in the sense that I'm not going to fret about that now because all I can do is sit here and wait like everybody else until all the full set of results have come out. Of course, we've ran this campaign with the ambition of leading a government, and that's certainly the ambition, but obviously we'll have to wait and see what the results are. If the Imperials are indeed the largest party, then as the position that I laid out last election, when I was reluctantly in the position of kingmaker and had to make a decision between New Labour or the Imperials, I stand by the fact that if the largest party in terms of seats has the first chance to form a government, and therefore it will be duty bound on Fenton to attempt to do that in order to pass a King's Speech. If the Imperials are the largest party, if that falls apart at any point, whether that's in the next couple of hours, whether that's in a week's time, in absolutely no uncertain terms, the Lib Dems are absolutely ready to form a government. And I'm absolutely ready to step up and get a King's Speech through the Houses of Parliament and get going, because that's what we're about. We are, of course, I'm talking about votes because it's on a personal level, it's pleasing to me that we have had those high numbers, but on a practical level, we're absolutely ready to get into government.
I think it is a good point to make that, as we were saying earlier, that this is the largest vote share we've seen in quite a long time, even a bit more than last election that we said was historic. So, with that being said, how do you think the campaign for the Liberal Democrats went? And if you do underperform, which you say you're not focusing on right now, but I mean, that's the practical results. If you do underperform and the campaign obviously did not come up to snuff, where do you see yourself as leader and going forward?
Well, I think ultimately to answer that question, you have to ask yourself what the narrative of this election actually was. And to me, it certainly seemed that the Imperials were, if not expecting, much like New Labour last election, focusing on this idea of a majority. And ultimately, what the exit poll has proven, even if it isn't quite accurate and the Imperials may push over the line, we don't know that yet, it has shown that isn't always attainable. And when we've actually on a one-to-one level spoken to citizens, as we have a lot over the last 10 days, when we've explained our plans and we've explained what we want to do, whether that be an imperial voter or somebody who's planning to vote Imperial, whether that just be people that we've campaigned to generally, there are plans. And I think that shows that no matter what the wider narrative of an election might seem, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, in terms of getting those votes out, the Lib Dems are a force to be reckoned with. And we proven that last time when in many ways that the narrative worked against us again, and we still managed to get 70 votes, and we still managed to break our record from previous elections. So obviously it remains to be seen what the ultimate outcome of this election will be, but I can't help but be pleased that our plans, when we have spoken to citizens, have been very popular.
That's good. And on that note, it is something more positive for the Liberal Democrats. What do you think what has gone right for you in this campaign? What are you really happy about, and glad that you changed from last term?
Well, for me, obviously, I've been leader now since April. I think that a lot of the stuff that I've certainly tried to do, consciously or unconsciously, has been a long-term thing in terms of ensuring that we stand for something as a party that is clear for people to see. And for me, that was definitely about leadership, and that was definitely about taking that place as a bold and progressive party. And I think linking in with that, we've obviously benefited from the fact that New Labour have lost members and they've lost support, and they've had a few issues in terms of changes to their front bench team. So I think that we've kind of almost, and a long-term point to make, I heard you discussing earlier on about the issue of me continuing as leader, or the issue of the team continuing in the party. Obviously, that remains to be seen. It's certainly my plan in the immediate term, obviously, to stay on. Long term, I don't know. In a few months' time, it's hard to tell where we'll all be, because things change rapidly. But to me, it definitely seems that whether we're, even if we don't get in government today, we are the alternative government now. And we will be, if that is the position that we play in this parliament, the strong opposition that we need going forward to hold the government account. If not, like I've said, we're ready to step up and form a government.
That is a hopeful message, and I'm glad we can take that away from this election night at least. And on that note, I would like to thank you for joining us, and we'll go back to Connor for more updates.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shorm. So we're now at 25 seats in. We can say that we have 14 Imperial seats, 7 Liberal Democrat seats, and 4 New Labour seats. We can say that we're not expecting many more New Labour gains, so we can be confident that New Labour will fall around 4 seats, maybe upwards of 7 or 8. But for the Imperial Party, obviously they're outperforming polls if they're only halfway through and at 14 seats, which tells us that it might very well be a majority government. And now we can also see that the Liberal Democrats are acknowledging the fact that they probably won't be in government, or if they are, it would be tenuous. I want to go to Torm, and I just want to ask you for your reflections on what Karanka just said, and then we'll go to Dom.
I think Karanka is very good at proposing philosophical and ideological positivity for the Liberal Democrats, right? He's very good at imbuing a spirit of strong morals, strong ideas, and strong policy. I think that very much came through on his ideas, and not very focused on the electoral results themselves, and more about kind of what happened and a reflection on how positive their message was received. That being said, I think it's bad that there wasn't a more focus on the seats, because we see them now getting outpaced continuously 2-1. The Imperials might form a majority, which completely just eliminates any Liberal Democratic say on policy, because they can just be ignored. So regardless of how noble that cause is, I think the Liberal Democrats need to find their niche in how to actually get themselves in a position to form a government.
Definitely. And before we go to Sid to reflect on that, we're going to go now to the map, which we can see now is updated, or it should be in just a second. We can see that Wales has been swept for the Imperial Party so far, which is a big change from before. Before, Wales was a very safe New Labour territory, which just reflects on the fact that Wales is gone. That's a New Labour bastion. That's 4 New Labour seats that are just gone. We can also look up now at Scotland, and we can see that while the Imperial Party have held the border, it looks like Scotland's going very yellow tonight, and that's not for the SNP, that's for the Lib Dems. They really do need to make gains in Scotland if they're going to make gains anywhere else. And right now, it looks like all Scottish seats will be going for the Liberal Democrats. We're not too sure. We haven't confirmed Edinburgh yet, but still, that's quite a big result for them. Looking to London as well, the fact that London only has 5 seats is important to take into account, because the Lib Dems had 2. They gained 1 now, which means the Lib Dems have won London. London is where New Labour needs to have seats if it's going to be at all relevant. If they're losing one of their London seats, it's going to make us question how many other London seats they're going to lose. They might lose their other, and so they'll only have 1 seat in London. But regardless, we just have to address the fact that the Imperial Party is everywhere. I think I remember to the April election, the Imperial Party was exclusively in the south of England. It was a bit comical how little seats they had elsewhere. Now, they have Wales, Northern Ireland, a strong presence in London, a strong presence in the north. We are going to very much assume a strong presence in the south. I think we are getting close to saying that it's going to be not only an Imperial majority, but a pretty comfortable imperial majority. We're not clear yet. It's just on the boundaries. They could fall at 24 seats or upwards of 30 seats. So, yeah, it could be a very great night for the Imperial Party. We have to start looking and moving over to that. And so, with the context of that, now I'm going to move back to the Imperial Party might have upwards of 30 seats. We're not sure yet. It could still fall around 25. But Sid, what do you think the Liberal Democrats need to do now? You said you addressed it very correctly that they are now they're no longer the third party. How do they become the first party? What do they do now to really differentiate themselves?
They definitely need to sustain consistent scrutiny throughout the upcoming term now. Like, they won't be able to do much in terms of policy, as others have said already, but they can definitely let public know that they're there, and then making sure that the government are being held to account. And I think they just have to remain motivated and have to remain consistently turning up every week in numbers and showing the public that they are actually committed to the parliament and to the country.
Like you're kind of on there. That I think also they're going to need to be a little more material. I think Torm, I know Karenka very well, obviously, but Torm diagnosed Karenka very, very well when he said that he's very intellectual, he's very philosophical, but he's not very material. He doesn't address every issue from a common sense perspective, which can be very good. It makes him different. But I think now that he's in opposition and he's leading the opposition and he's led opposition before, he hasn't risen exactly to the challenge. He's done very well, but he's never gone on to win from opposition. He hasn't been prime minister. I think now Karenka really needs to just adopt that common sense political mentality. And it's almost weird to say that he has to be political because he's a politician, but he needs to be very political now and focus on strategizing if he's to differentiate himself from any other party. I mean, we can see New Labour obviously is a party built to win, or had a mentality that was built to win. They could pull that together in opposition now, and Karenka needs to outpace them, but also now needs to outpace the Imperial Party, which itself is going to have a lot of struggles. And I want to go to Torm about this, but a majority government has a lot of struggles. It's not an easy road. I mean, we remember Monty's government that really went in and didn't have any real accountability and fell apart because of its majority. Its own success was its downfall. So we'll go to Torm now about that. What do you think really needs to be done in the Imperial Party to make sure that they don't have a repeat of Monty's government?
I feel like the most important thing for majority governments is concise leadership. I feel like the struggles in Monty was that he wasn't able to rely on other people. He was like the buck stopped on his desk, quite literally. There was no one else to stop it on. I think Fenton's going to face the same challenge. He's very active in other parts of the group. He's going to need to figure out a group of people around him that he can rely on to say, you should go to X for this, Y for this, and really get himself organized, because that's the only way the majority government can operate. When you're a coalition, there's the differentiation of party leadership, and the party leadership can kind of control their own members more directly than in a more poignant way, because there's less of them, right? So you can keep tabs on them more effectively because there's only a handful. But when you're the majority government, everything is on your desk. So it'll be very interesting to see who Fenton eventually hires in his office and how that all operates, because it's really going to make or break it.
A little bit of a mic issue, but yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sid, you ran a successful majority government. I say successful even though I was your opposition leader. I'll say that you were active the full term, you got stuff done, and you were innovative. What do you think made your majority government different than most of the majority governments we've seen?
I think I put a lot of trust in the ministers in my government. So, like, I was giving them freedom so they had to be responsible for what they were doing, and it wasn't just me holding their hand at every opportunity, and it forced them to get creative and to do things themselves. And I think, like, many members in that cabinet went on to be prime minister after me, and I think that shows that you've got to trust your cabinet. If you're trying to do everything yourself, if you're trying to make sure that every single detail is controlled by you, it's just not going to work, and you definitely need to trust your cabinet. And I think the Imperials have a good cabinet, and I think Fenton is a good man manager, and I think he definitely has potential to be a very good prime minister, but he just needs to make sure that his cabinet, whilst he needs to make sure they're kept in check, I think he needs to trust them and to be able to go off and really implement their policies in their respective departments.
I would just want a follow-up question to that. Did you do anything to actively motivate your cabinet? I know you said you gave them the freedom, which is a huge thing that I agree with, but did you do anything other than give them freedom? Is this going to be a game of what Fent has to do, or is this just going to be a game of the personality and the mentality of his cabinet? Do you think?
I definitely made sure that throughout the week they had set goals, and I think obviously with the cabinet reports, which were released weekly, I always made sure that they were up to standards, like before the opposition even had a chance to look at them. And I think he definitely should take an interest in all his departments, and it will, once you get a month into the term, motivation does become an issue. But I think as long as he sets out a weekly plan of what they want to achieve that week, I think they'll be all right. And I think he did say earlier, when he was being interviewed by Tom, that they're going to hit the ground running, and it'll be interesting to see if he can actually live up to that.
And it's a very fair point. The cabinet reports can be a really good tool if they're actually used with intention, and not all governments use them with intention. That's an interesting point, and I do hope Fenton, I'm sure he was listening, and I hope he takes that to heart. And I do hope every party leader and party member is taking what we're saying to heart. I'm going to do a quick recap. We're going to have another map at 40 seats, and in about 6 minutes, I'm going to be ready to give a big call. We have to see a few more seats. But the quick recap. So Gwent, which was Soupchild's seat, I miscalled Vale of Glamorgan. He still lost Gwent. That was a very difficult loss. Wiltshire was another major New Labour win. That was when they stole Spartacade's seat, if you remember last election. Well, they've lost Wiltshire. They lost pretty dramatically Theo's old seat of North Yorkshire, which was going to not the Liberal Democrats, but the Imperial Party. So a lot of New Labour's, pretty iconic seats are going away. They also lost West Midlands, and ironically and interestingly, they lost Brighton. And there's a funny story behind Brighton, because it was Sanguis Farron's seat before he defected, and now it's back under his control, or in his room, which I just think is so emblematic of all the gains New Labour have been lost, and then the seats that might have held a little bit of negative memories are also being lost. They're currently not left with many seats. They have held Merseyside, they've held Islington, they gained Nottingham, held Cardiff. It's looking like they'll hold Cheshire. Outside that, I don't know anything. They gained Greater Manchester, so that's 6 seats maybe they might have. They've lost a lot of their main seats, and they have a lot of the new seats just because they're obviously New Labour. And it's just going to be very difficult for New Labour to to cling to the identity they had before. They're going to have to really shape a new self for New Labour. And I guess I'm going to go back to Sid here. We talked about what the Liberal Democrats need to do. What does New Labour need to do? Like, where do they go from here? They have nothing right now. They have none of their old really iconic seats, which of course doesn't mean much practically, but is a major indictment of the culture in the party. But also, they don't have really any of their old leaders, any of their old cabinet. No one who's really able to come and speak. We had Noah, who did well, but did not receive the best reaction. What does New Labour do? What is Soup's game plan now? Good.
I think this is kind of a blessing in disguise for Soup. Like, I think if he continued to have like double-digit numbers in terms of seats, he would be overwhelmed with the amount of people he has to manage. And I think now with 6 seats, whilst it's not obviously the leading party in opposition, he can very much keep control of the members who will be sitting under the new Labour whip. And I think he has the opportunity to establish collective unity with the small amount of MPs they have, and they can try and form a new identity in the next Commons.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. They need a new identity, and it is a blessing in disguise. I remember when I took over Labour after the Royalists dissolved, I was not in over my head, I wouldn't say, but I was lost. I did not have enough people to fill seats. I knew what my strategy was. We just couldn't get people to Parliament. So this might be a good blessing for Soup to, get 6-7 people who are going to be active every session and are going to go to the House of Commons, ask questions, really be a unique party. I want to go to Torm, though, because I think it's also important to reflect on the fact that this is also a loss, and it's going to be demotivating for New Labour. How does Soup motivate New Labour now? I think we can say that Soup, he did not win his independent bid, but Soup's the leader, he's the elected leader, and he's pretty confident in his position. How does Soup go ahead now? Because he has to go ahead. There's no one else to replace him. How does he motivate? How does he encourage the party to get those 6 or 7 active people to then come back stronger next time?
I genuinely don't know. I think New Labour can find 6 or 7 people. Will they be active? Probably. Will they be good is another question. I generally don't see how New Labour gets out of the pits of Soupchild. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but he's inexperienced as a leader. He has not really distinguished himself as a minister in any government. He's mostly been a backbencher. So I think he's going to spend a lot of time in this position as the third party if the party arrangement stays this way. And probably relegated to the position that Labour was, for most of its existence in this group. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how he takes in if he learns from whatever he does this term, but I'm not very hopeful.
That's a fair point. It's hard to get out of that rut. It's going to take innovation. It's going to take childlike imagination, I would say, which I hope Soup is ready to muster. But yes, so in a minute we're going to go to the map, and we do have that call to make. But just to give everyone an update, we are at 23 Imperial seats, 12 Liberal seats, and 5 New Labour seats. So far, this looks like it's going to be the worst New Labour result since April 2019. It looks like it's going to be the best Liberal Democrat result since it's been reformed. So that's well over a year. That's a long time, especially considering the fact that the only Lib Dem Prime Minister was Torm. And we'll hold off before talking about the Imperial Party. I think we're ready to go to the map now. So let me double check that. Oh, we are not. I will just continue talking then about... So let's address. We did just get Edinburgh called, which was a Liberal Democrat gain. We have to just address the fact that all of Scotland has gone for the Liberal Democrats, which just means that New Labour doesn't have a base right now, which is intriguing, especially for me as the person who designed the constituency system. It's odd to have to look at this and say that where does New Labour have their base? And while the constituencies aren't relevant to the voting, I would say to an extent they're very emblematic of the state of the party, because if you have seats in every corner and no 2 seats next to each other, it means that you didn't do well. And obviously we know that New Labour didn't do well, but we have to process it, I would say, in my opinion, as both a devastating loss, but like Sid said, a blessing in disguise if it's done correctly. I agree with Tom. I don't know what Soup should do next. continue moving on in a minute. 1 second. We're going to go to a real quick break in a moment, and then we'll be back with the map. And so now we're comfortable saying that, as you can say, I'll move over there now. We can look at the map, and it's obvious to us now that it's going to be an imperial majority, and it's going to be a really big imperial majority. Right now, looking at it, it's obvious that it's going to be a record. It might be upwards of 10 seats. I'm not sure, though I am hearing that the Electoral Commission has posted the results, which means we will be slowing down soon. But it's an important thing to note that this is going to be a record majority for the Imperial Party. We'll address the full results in a minute then. We'll just update the ticker, and then we'll conclude. But looking at this, it's a momentous night. If the Imperial Party got a majority of such a high turnout, it's definitely also a record number of votes. And I want to say, I said this last time, but it's a bit taunting to the Liberal Democrats that they have a massive amount of votes, but it left them in second place, which just accentuates how big the turnout was and how much people are campaigning. So I want to go to Torm real quick. Just your thoughts on the fact that this is a record majority, and then we'll go to the final result.
Oh my gosh. I believe we were seeing that Imperials got 29 seats, which is, I would think, unthinkable for the opposition. That only really gives the Liberal Democrats a couple more seats that they gained the entire night. If I was Soup and Kranka, I would be very worried because it's a complete rebuke of their policies. Quite frankly, they could not even challenge the Imperials. Like, such a majority like this is unbelievable.
But yes, so we're now going to be looking at the election results, where the screen will be updated in just a moment. But we can say that let me get the PDF up myself, that it is an imperial majority government. 58% of the vote was for the Imperial Party, 28% was for the Liberal Democrats, 12% was for the New Labour Party. So that's 29 seats for the Imperial Party, which is the largest record elected majority, not the largest majority because some parties have merged midterm. That makes it complicated, but no party has ever won 60% of the vote in a contested election. They'll win it if there's no one else like Monty, or they'll merge into it, but no one has won that much of the vote when there's 3 active parties trying. This is the best Liberal Democrat result at 15 seats as an 8-seat gain, massively higher than what the result was expected to be for them, according to other polls, but lower than the exit poll. Obviously, the exit poll was quite off, which is an interesting circumstance given it was right on before. The New Labour Party, we had expected them to hit 5 seats. They ended up going to 6, which is higher than we expected, but again, lower than the exit poll. I think, just looking at it, New Labour lost 16 seats. The Imperial Party only gained 14. It's important to have that contrast there, that New Labour lost more than the Imperial Party gained, whereas the Liberal Democrats gained about half of what New Labour lost. Liberal Democrats doubled their seat count. The Imperial Party doubled their seat count. New Labour much more than halved their seat count. I want to go to Dom now we'll do a few final reflections, and then we'll close it up for the evening. So Dom, do you have any final comments?
The Imperial Party really have an opportunity now to make a difference. Like, this is the first elected majority we've seen in, I think, years. So I think they definitely have a mandate now to go and govern, and it'll be interesting to see how they perform.
Yes. So Torim, do you have any, final comments, just general reflections on the result?
I think it's a very good result for government, at least, because it means they're quite stable at this point. I think the Imperials, like Dom said, have a very good opportunity to get a lot done. They have a big mandate. There's really no one to challenge them on policy. But as someone who loves opposition, I'm very upset with this result. I love seeing the back and forth, the debates, the contrasting ideals. So I'm quite disappointed to see the Liberal Democrats underperform and obviously New Labour collapse, but I think it should still be productive.
Definitely. But so yes, we have the results up there. 29 Imperial, 15 Liberal Democrat, 6 New Labour. I believe that's really it for us. Thank you for coming. We had a little mix-up with the Electoral Commission there, but that's fine. We were about to call, actually, when we called the final results. We would have had the results by then anyway, so it was only a minute or two off. But yes, thank you for coming this evening. This was a very interesting election. The exit poll was wrong, but the result was what we expected from other polls. So thank you for coming tonight. Please leave us feedback in the election discussion channel. Of course, we didn't get to implement all the changes you suggested because of the early election, but we can't thank you enough for coming, participating. Thank you to party guests for coming and participating. And thank you to the Electoral Commission and group management for letting us do this. Thank you. Good night.